I have a feeling that YouTube is going to demonetize and deboost this video a lot because of the subject matter. There's been some scandal around Google suppressing anti-Trump related searches, so if you leave a like and a comment on this video because you enjoyed it, it would mean a lot for this video because I don't want this particular story to get drowned out. And this is because the story of Trump's attempts to subvert the results of the 2020 election have been largely dropped by many people on the left, and it's very frustrating to me. Donald Trump has engaged in some of the most fascist rhetoric and action possible centered around his response to his election losses. And because it was, a while ago, no one wants to talk about 2020. No one wants to talk about J6 anymore. No one wants to talk about all the measures Trump and his cronies in his last administration moved for to try and subvert our democratic system. And what's so frustrating about that is that it's one of the worst things Trump ever did. And for the most part, people on the left don't even care. Yeah, Russiagate is also similar, where a lot of people just dropped that, even though it was also a real thing and pertained to one of the worst things Trump ever did. But that aside, if you remember when Donald Trump was trying to subvert the election results, before 2020 itself had started, in the aftermath of November to January, famously, Rudy Giuliani was all over the place trying to call for the results to be overturned and calling the results fake. Famously, there was that clip of Rudy Giuliani giving a speech in a parking lot, and he was sweating so much that the, dye he used in his hair was, dripping down his face. He had, this brown dye of sweat, this stream of brown dye and sweat going down his face. It was a very famous image. If you look up Rudy Giuliani dye or Rudy Giuliani sweat, you'll know what I'm talking about. But he was a big dick rider for Trump, and his personal attorney, by the way, and also was at one point the mayor of New York and was called America's mayor. He was mayor during 9/11 and was really popular back then. But nowadays, he's absolutely disgraced. And what was once his office is now filled by Zoran Mamdani, a based as fuck, progressive, leftist candidate. I'd call him a leftist, I would. This news shouldn't surprise us at all, considering everything that Giuliani did for Donald Trump. Trump pardons Rudy Giuliani and others who backed his efforts to overturn his 2020 election loss. President Donald Trump has pardoned his former personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, his one-time chief of staff, Mark Meadows, and others accused of backing the Republicans' efforts to overturn the 2020 election. The full, complete, and unconditional pardon for dozens of Trump allies are largely symbolic. It applies only to federal crimes, and none of the people named in the proclamation were ever charged federally over the bid to subvert the election won by Democrat Joe Biden. It doesn't affect state charges, though state prosecutions stemming from the 2020 election have hit a dead end and are just limping along. Sorry. It's weird how they changed the text for that color. They changed the text color for that word. I'm guessing it's a link to another article related. The move, however, underscores Trump's continued efforts to promote the idea that the 2020 election was stolen from him, even though courts around the country and Trump's own attorney general at the time found no evidence of fraud that could have affected the outcome. Reviews, recounts, and audits of the election in the battleground states where Trump contested his loss also affirmed Biden's victory. He challenged the results in court over 50 times. It was insane. He spent most of Biden's presidency challenging the election results in court and losing every single time. He had no evidence other than he lost, and that made him mad. That was his only evidence. That a fair election would not have led to him losing was his only evidence. That if the election was fair, he had to have won. The move, however, underscores Trump's continued efforts to promote the idea that the 2020 election was stolen. Trump's recent actions follows the sweeping pardons of the hundreds of Trump supporters charged in the January 6th, 2021 riot at the U.S. Capitol, including those convicted of attacking law enforcement. Ed Martin, the Department of Justice's point man on pardons and a former lawyer for the J6 defendants, linked his announcement of the pardons to a post on X that read, "No MAGA left behind." They always gotta protect their own, don't they? Dozens of Trump allies have received pardons. Among those also pardoned were Sidney Powell, an attorney who promoted baseless conspiracy theories about a stolen election, John Eastman, another lawyer who pushed a plan to keep Trump in power, and Jeffrey Clark, a former Justice Department official who championed Trump's efforts to challenge his election loss. Also named were Republicans who acted as fake electors for Trump and were charged in state cases accusing them of submitting false certificates that confirmed they were legitimate electors despite Biden's victory in those states. Oh my God. For those who don't know, this is often called the fake electors scheme and was one of the most brazen attempts to overturn the election results out there. It was insane. Here, let me, we're going to do a quick side post to this, okay? This is important. Michigan dismissal highlights the challenges in prosecuting cases against Trump's 2020 fake electors. Before the abandoned federal attempt to prosecute Donald Trump for trying to overturn his 2020 election loss, state and local prosecutors brought cases against his fake electors. The term referred to people who, in several of the swing states won by former President Joe Biden, declared themselves to be the rightful electors who would vote for Trump in the Electoral College. It was part of Trump's long-shot bid to push Congress to reject Biden's electors and throw the election to him. Democratic prosecutors filed indictments against them before Trump himself was charged by a special prosecutor appointed by Biden's Department of Justice, making the fake electors the most prominent example of how those who helped Trump faced consequences for their attempt to reverse the election results. Trump literally hired a bunch of people, told them to show up and say they were the electors who were supposed to vote in the Electoral College for who their electoral vote would go to. Trump just hired a bunch of people to say they were the person who was meant to do it. They weren't. They literally weren't. The proclamation explicitly says the pardon does not apply to the president himself, who has continued to repeat the lie that the 2020 election was stolen from him, and use that falsehood to argue for sweeping changes in the way the country votes, and demanded his Justice Department investigate the vote count that led to his loss. The pardon described efforts to prosecute the Trump allies as a grave national injustice perpetrated on the American people, and said the pardons were designed to continue the process of national reconciliation. Giuliani and others have denied any wrongdoing, arguing they were simply challenging an election they believed was tainted by fraud. Quote, "These great Americans were persecuted and put through hell by the Biden administration for challenging an election, which is the cornerstone of democracy," White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said in an emailed statement. Those pardoned were not prosecuted by the Biden administration, however. They were charged only by state prosecutors who operate separately from the Justice Department. An Associated Press investigation after the 2020 election found 475 cases of potential voter fraud across the 6 battleground states, far too few to change the outcome. Giuliani, a former New York mayor, was one of the most vocal supporters of Trump's unsubstantiated claims of large-scale voter fraud after the 2020 election. He was also an example of the limited impact of the pardons. Giuliani has been disbarred in Washington, D.C., and New York over his advocacy of Trump's bogus election claims, and lost a $148 million defamation case brought on by 2 former Georgia election workers whose lives were upended by conspiracy theories he pushed. Since pardons only absolve people from legal responsibility for federal crimes, they're unlikely to ease Giuliani's legal woes. Ted Goodman, a spokesperson for Giuliani, said the former mayor never sought a pardon, but is deeply grateful for President Trump's decision. Rudy Giuliani stands by his work following the 2020 presidential election when he responded to the legitimate concerns of thousands of everyday Americans, Goodman said in an emailed statement. While the pardons may have no immediate legal impact, experts warned they send a dangerous message for future elections. It is a complete abdication of responsibility of the federal government to ensure we don't have future attempts to overturn elections, said Rick Hansen, a UCLA law professor. Ultimately, the message it sends is, we'll take care of you when the time comes. It's interesting that Trump did this even though there's actually no way that the pardon helps them. Why do you guys think he did it? Is it just a virtue signal? Is it just like a symbolic reward for their loyalty? Is it like some kind of tease or taunt? Or do you think Trump legitimately is too stupid to know that a federal pardon won't do anything about state charges. What do you think Trump's goal is here? Do you think Trump just doesn't know that this won't do anything about state charges? Or do you think he knows that this is just a stunt? It's a reward, a stunt, and a message all at once. They're distractions? Oh! You're right. You're right. Maybe they're flooding the zone. Maybe this is Trump trying to distract from the Epstein files and the fact that Zohran Mamdani just won in basically a landslide in New York City. That's a good point. Some pardoned were co-conspirators in Trump's federal case. Trump himself was indicted on federal felony charges, accusing him of working to overturn his 2020 election defeat. But the case brought by Justice Department Special Counsel Jack Smith was abandoned in November after Trump's victory over Democrat Kamala Harris because of the department's policy against persecuting sitting presidents. Giuliani, Powell, Eastman, and Clark were alleged co-conspirators in the federal case brought against Trump, but were never charged with federal crimes. Giuliani, Meadows, and others named in the proclamation have been charged by prosecutors in Georgia, Arizona, Michigan, Nevada, and Wisconsin over the 2020 election, but the cases have repeatedly hit roadblocks or have been dismissed. A judge in September dismissed the Michigan case against 15 Republicans accused of attempting to falsely certify Trump as the winner of the election in that battleground state. Eastman, a former dean of Chapman University Law School in Southern California, was a close advisor to Trump in the wake of the 2020 election and wrote a memo laying out steps to Vice President Mike Pence that he could take to stop the counting of electoral votes while presiding over Congress's joint session on J6 to keep Trump in office. For those that don't know, it was Pence who denied the request from Eastman to go through that path, and that is what led to J6 happening, and so many Trump supporters going there with the intent of killing Mike Pence himself. They all thought that Mike Pence was going to do it. They all thought Mike Pence was going to refuse to certify the results and was going to more or less say Trump won and deem it so right then and there. Clark, who is now overseeing a federal regulatory office, also is facing possible disbarment in Washington over his advocacy of Trump's claims. Clark clashed with Justice Department superiors over a letter he drafted after the 2020 election that said the department was investigating various irregularities and had identified significant concerns that may have affected the election in Georgia and other states. Clark said in a social media post Monday that he did nothing wrong and shouldn't have had to battle this witch hunt for 4+ years. The top comment is, I think these are preemptive pardons because the Jack Smith files will be made public and will show how all of those pardoned by Trump himself were very involved. I can't wait. This seems like useless press since many mentioned are not facing any federal charges and therefore can't be pardoned. What this does do is demonstrate to MAGA people that Trump will let them go free if they illegally follow his directions. The Supreme Court told Trump he was above the law. The pardons will make his followers feel above the law. That's a good point. That's a good point. While this doesn't have any real material effect, it's a virtue signal that is meant to bolster his supporters into being more motivated, more empowered to follow him, and to do illegal things for him. They're going to feel as though even if they go and attack a trans person, Donald Trump is going to pardon them. But they don't know, they don't need to know at least, that would be state charges, and a federal pardon does nothing for that. Funnily enough, Mike Pence was hated here until he was with Trump, and then after J6, he became hated here again. That's really funny. Full circle. Back to where the journey began, I guess. Anyway, not much else to say about this, but if you end up liking the video, like I said, please leave a like, comment, subscribe, and drop a hype. It really does help a lot. Helps to boost the video so it gets seen by lots of people. I really do appreciate it, and hopefully YouTube doesn't suppress this one because it's a negative video about Trump. Until next time, though.